So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Nik Hayes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, can you do them down here? Hi everybody, and thanks for coming. I'd like to say a big thank you to Dave Gillam for organising this great event. Okay, so my name's Nik Hayes, and I've spent most of my life as a musician. I come from the Midlands originally. Never had an interest in photography, never had an interest in filming anything really. A lot of my friends went on to do photographic courses after we left school and never had any interest. But all that was about to change as one night, Christmas Day evening 2008, I was walking my dog through Abingdon where I live. Went down into a park which is really misty. There's a huge ground mist and a sky mist, and it's very hard to actually tell what was the sky and what was the actual ground mist. There's a fine line where they met. And basically I was walking along with the dog and I could see basically the dog wanted to go back up an alleyway which had already gone down. So I went back up there, stood there, and while he was doing his bits and bobs, I started looking around and I could see a faint sort of pinkish glow coming from the sky, probably about 200 foot in the air, moving very slow. And at first I couldn't make out what it was. So I stood there staring at the sky, and all of a sudden this thing moved near, and that's the object you can see on the left up there, and that's an embossed version. And what happened was, all of a sudden there was an air pocket, sort of a thinner fog, but all of a sudden this thing showed itself in all its glory, and it was pulsating as if it was breathing. And I followed it for probably about 200 yards until I went out to an isolated area near a park. And the thing kept disappearing, and then you could just see like a warm sort of glow. And then the thing sort of lit right up, and then just carried on moving, no more than about 2.5 miles an hour. So I followed it as far as I could. I didn't actually have a camera on me at the time, and I got a camera that day, brand new. For Christmas, I took loads of pictures and got bored with it, so I left it at home. So what happened was I ran home with my dog, got my little Casio camera, put it on movie mode, went out again for about an hour and a half trying to record this thing. And it disappeared, all but disappeared. Then I saw it again about half an hour later, and I managed to film about 3 or 4 seconds of really shaky footage, but one of the stills that came out was the still that you can see up there. Now the object looked like it was alive. It was actually pulsating and breathing, moving at no more than 2.5 miles an hour. And it seemed to be aware that I was watching it. So I stood there for quite a while. My dog started whimpering and getting a bit scared, so I took as much footage as I can. I filmed for like 15 minutes, but I only ever got like a couple of seconds of footage that I could get a clear still from. So after I'd seen this UFO, I really didn't know what I'd seen, so I started looking into UFO photography and trying to find out what I could. And I couldn't find anything that looked anything like this, and the fact that it seemed to be alive, and it reminded me of something from the deep ocean, like a bioluminescent life form. So after about 6-7 months, I was just about to give up, and a friend came round and told me about a video he'd seen with a guy called Trevor, Constable. Now Trevor had filmed biological UFOs in the Mojave Deserts back in the 1950s, and he released 2 books. One was They Live in the Sky, which came out in 1958, and the other one was Cosmic Pulse of Life, which came out in 1976. So I began reading these books, and I decided to write off to Trevor and tell him that I was thinking of not using infrared film like he was, but actually using digital. So he wrote back to me, and he was in his 80s at the time. He wrote back to me and encouraged me. So therefore I decided to start my own quest for the invisibles, to record. Well, basically he recorded UFOs that are invisible to they were invisible to human sight, that seem to exist beyond into the infrared. So if we have a look here, you'll see. But basically, the thing that got him interested was he had a lot of reports where UFOs were actually seen, not seen, but they showed up on radar. And he was very intrigued by stories where UFOs had appeared and disappeared whilst they were under observation. So he began going into the Mojave Desert using a standard camera loaded with infrared film, and he filmed an area called Giant Rock. He didn't know where to start. He didn't know how he was going to objectify or attract the UFOs to his position, obviously because they're invisible. So if we look on there, you'll see the reason why he started looking in the infrared was because of radar, because he could see that these things were being picked up on radar. And he could see that the radar basically bordered the infrared. So he thought he'd start looking for UFOs in the infrared. So basically, he was stuck he wasn't sure how to attract the UFOs to his position. Obviously, they were invisible. He had to track them, then he had to know they were there. So he started using the star exercise, which is an esoteric procedure, as you can see there. And it basically involves making a star shape and facing east where the sun's rising, and a star shape like that, and moving across the north-south lines, and then turning all the way around and facing west, and then doing it again, and then turning all the way around again and facing north, and going across the east to west line, and then turning all the way around facing south and going across the east line again. So it's basically just standing like that and going across the lines. He could feel warmth in his hands as he crossed the north, south, east, west lines. They do 100 repetitions of this right up on a rock. And another problem he had was how he was going to see the UFOs if they're invisible. So he started using a technique where he relaxed his eyes, and this is something he learned while he was in the Merchant Marine. He was basically a New Zealander, and he did 35 years in the US Merchant Marine during the war and afterwards. So he used a technique that they used to use for seeing ships coming over the horizon. So he relaxed his eyes completely, and he found that some of these objects would show up as pinpricks of light. So this is how he started doing it. So he'd stand there at dawn and spend a couple of hours doing repeats of the star exercise, and he'd have a camera on him, and his friend James Woods, Dr. James Woods, also had an infrared camera, and basically they both filmed many different types of UFOs at this place in Giant Rock. Now, his first book, They Live in the Sky, the first thing he ever caught was the amoeba photograph, which you can see in the left of this. And he took 6 successive photographs of this creature as it moved above him and went straight along the desert terrain. He was able to frame parts of the desert terrain in his photograph. And he found that these things seemed to be biological. Although many of them appeared to be saucer-shaped, spherical, cigar-shaped, he found that they were in fact living, they were alive, rather than being constructed craft. The picture on the right is Trevor James Constable surrounded by spherical invisible UFOs. And this photograph is one of about 3 or 4 taken by Jim Woods and by Trevor. That's Trevor in the bottom left corner. And these are spheroidal UFOs. And he found that many of these would go onto the infrared film. They wouldn't actually react with the emulsions. They would leave a dark sort of blank area where no sort of emulsion, nothing had happened with the emulsions. And as you can see, some of these are swelling and changing, and some of them are disappearing and coming back again. But he took about 5 photographs between him and Dr. James Wood showing these spherical UFOs that were pulsating. His next book was called The Cosmic Purpose of Life, and by this time he discovered the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, and he began using a Cloudbuster, which you can see in the top centre picture. This consisted of an array of, literally an array of empty tubes which were basically grounded in water, and it was speculated that it would affect the ethers, excite the ethers, and this would attract some of the invisible UFOs. So he began using this in 1968 as opposed to using the star exercise. This is pretty typical of the sort of stuff that he recorded over the years he was doing it. Many of them looked egg-shaped, many of them looked saucer-shaped, and many of them looked spherical. If you look at number B on here, you'll see these pulsating objects above Mount Wilson, and within the few photographs he'd taken of this area, these things were changing and pulsating and disappearing again, just within him taking a few shots. But he carried on doing this work for quite a long time. He carried right on into the 80s, where he gave up UFO work in favour of weather engineering. I was totally blown away with this, because the thing that I saw on that Christmas Day evening reminded me of a living life form, and I found that it was only Trevor's work that actually explained this kind of thing, and I didn't find any reference to any kind of UFOs being alive in any of the books that I ever read. So I decided to get myself an infrared camera and start doing my own little quest to see what I could actually film in the infrared. Right, and it's through Trevor's work that I also found out about Luciano Bocconi and the GRCU, which are an Italian research group. And as you can see, they used lots of different techniques for actually recognising that the UFOs were there. They would use Geiger counters, precision magnetic compasses, temperature indicators, ultraviolet detectors, and heat and light detectors, plus a whole lot more. There's about 25 members of the GRCU group, and they filmed all through sort of the 80s. And I managed to get hold of a book written by Luciano Bocconi, who was actually in charge of the group, and it was called UFO La Realtà Nascosta, which was UFO The Hidden Reality. Now the GRCU, they often took photographs when on holiday. They used black and white infrared film, and they also used colour infrared film. And this is an example taken by one of the GRCU photographers, taken in Bangkok, Thailand. Shows an invisible plasmoidal UFO just above Bangkok. And this was typical of what Trevor, James Constable and the GRCU group filmed. And again, these things seem to be alive rather than being actual craft of any type. Now, the GRCU started experimenting, as I have, with long exposure times, and the pictures up there is a perfect example of invisible plasmoids manifesting. This is a 40-second exposure, and as you can see, the left-hand photograph, it basically was just like an orb, and these things started hatching out of it and sort of shooting off from it. And they took a lot of photographs like this, and in some of the photographs they took, these balls turned into little entities, and some of them had halos, some of them had horns. But they didn't really get anything that looked craft-like. But they got a whole load of moving orbs that would split, come back together again, and very often an entity or various entities like this would come out from them. And they spent a long time doing this. And there's 25 members, so of course they took an awful lot of footage over the years. And the best of it was in this book, La Realidad Nas Costa. So I decided to start filming in 2010. When I first started filming, I'd go out just out of Abingdon, and I'd basically just take hundreds of photographs, just hoping that I'd capture something. And I'd be filming at like 1/10,000th of a second, and I found that in many of the photographs there would be spherical objects just in one photograph, or there'd be saucer-like objects. And I also started filming using movie mode, which is 30 frames a second. I captured a whole lot of strange V-shaped craft and other strange anomalies in the sky, but because they're infrared, the very nature of them means they don't show that easily because they're reflected infrared light. So a lot of them seem very, very high in the sky. They all seem to be coming through at the same point, which seems to be about 3,000 foot in the sky. And this is something I'm going to get back to a bit later. So I assembled myself a Cloudbuster, just built from some pipes. This is the first one I built. And I started from my garden. I've got about an acre of land where I live with my sister. And I started setting the Cloudbuster up and filming. And I'd have like an infrared camera filming in movie mode. I'd have a standard camera filming in movie mode, recording the visible light spectrum at this point. And then I also got hold of some ultraviolet equipment. Decided I would check out the ultraviolet. And this is a view through the infrared of the Cloudbuster. This is a 720 nanometer infrared pass filter. And as you can see, the trees are white, and that's due to the reflected infrared radiation. Now, I'd sometimes film for about 4 or 5 hours with the Cloudbuster. I'd do certain movements on it. I'd have all the cameras trained into the sky exactly where the Cloudbuster was aiming. A lot of the time, I'd try and get something physical in the scene, like the top of a tree, or something that would help to put the picture in perspective rather than just having sky shots. So I began looking into the ultraviolet, and not many people have really looked into that. Trevor, James Constable did look into it to a certain extent, but most of his work was in the infrared. And I decided to start doing the infrared work at night. So in the daytime, I began using a full spectrum camcorder, and this is a camcorder. What am I going to explain? Most camcorders and cameras that you get that are digital, they've got a filter in there that blocks invisible light. So in the case of the full spectrum camcorder, that was taken out, and in its place was put a piece of clear quartz, which enabled the camcorder to see infrared, visible spectrum and ultraviolet. And then you use a combination of different filters to either get rid of what part of the spectrum you don't want to look at, or so in this case, this is like a 720 nanometer infrared pass filter, and that blocks all the visible light spectrum apart from a tiny bit of red that occurs just before the infrared. And the ultraviolet's blocked, so it's basically almost like a pure infrared pass filter. And you can also get 780 nanometer pass filters and the whole selection right up to about 1,000 nanometers. But unless you're filming in really bright sunlight, which we don't get a lot of in England, I found it's best to stick with something like a 720. It's also good to have a bit of visible light in it, especially when filming at night, because you can see sort of some of the sun in the sky and sort of moonlight, and it helps to sort of put things in perspective. So, okay, this is showing you the illumination zone. What I discovered in the ultraviolet through my work is a lot of these things I was filming seem to be invisible, even in the ultraviolet, and they heavily relied on being lit up by the sunlight. So what I use the edge of a house roof. It's a single-story house roof, and I set the camcorder up at 45 degrees, aiming straight up the roof. zoomed in just very slightly. This is obviously an enlargement, and it creates what I call the illumination zone. You can see the sun being kept behind the roof. What I found is that you've got to keep moving the camcorder every sort of 5 minutes to allow for the sun rising, but you just try and keep it so that the sun's just about coming over the top. And that seems to light up any phenomenon which is either going through this area or sort of just above it. Okay, this was one of the first photographs I took. I got my first 2 captures on this. This is not photographs, but video footage. These are 2 frames, 2 consecutive frames taken in the ultraviolet, and it shows a mushroom-like UFO coming into frame, and gradually, as it hits the illumination zone, you can see it forming into the mushroom shape. And this is pretty typical of a lot of the things that the GRCU and Trevor James Constable filmed. I filmed things like this in the ultraviolet, mainly in the ultraviolet. I found that in the infrared, a lot of these things didn't come out as clear. So I decided to stick with the ultraviolet and began going out almost every day. That's about 5 days a week. I'll be filming for 7 hours a day, sometimes using 25 frames per second, sometimes using 50 frames per second. It took me, I filmed non-stop for 5 years. It took me probably about a year to look through all the footage, because some of these things were appearing just on like 1 frame or 2 frames out of the whole sort of 6 or 7 hours of filming. So there's another example, and as with many of these things, they don't seem to make sense. A lot of them come past and they lit up just for a fraction of a second, and then they appear in the ultraviolet. And this is pretty typical of quite a few of the things that I've managed to record. And you can just see the edge of the guttering protection on the edge of the roof. This appeared in 2 frames, but in one of the frames, all you could see was just the end of the sort of like propeller-looking thing. And once past the illumination zone, many of these things become invisible totally again, and you can't see them. Although some of them are self-illumined, and they are their own light source, so they don't rely on being lit up, but by the sun. Right, this is a good example of a UFO. This is 3 consecutive frames. It goes from the right to the left, A, B, and C, and it shows an invisible form just above the top of my sister's house. It seems to be changing, almost changing in each video still. And I didn't say anything at the time when I took this, but I did get a Geiger counter hit, because I always use a Geiger counter myself in order to detect some of these things. And I found that the normal background radiation levels is between 0.08 microsieverts per hour and 0.12. So I set my Geiger counter for 0.20 and found that this is a very good way of telling when these things are near. You get a sudden high peak. So basically I'd set the Geiger counter up on a stand, and I'd sort of sit on a tall chair looking straight up the roof at 45 degrees, and as soon as I got a hit, I'd mark that position on the recording. Then I'd later go back and have a look through it. But I did find many of these things actually appeared and didn't get any kind of a Geiger counter hit on it at all. So it was just a matter of looking back through everything and just trying to see what I could actually see. Now this is a very strange one. This was taken just above the garage roof, and it shows one of the most stranger captures that I've ever had. It seems that it's going from left to right above the top of the house, and it was only visible in 2 frames. In the other frames, it was totally invisible. Once it got out of the illumination zone, it was totally invisible again. And I've caught a few of these things before, but this is by far the clearest, and this has been blown up to a certain extent. But the area that you can see at the top is about 2 foot from left to right. At the top of the roof, it's actually a really long tile that we've got, which is about 2 foot long. And what I do is when I zoom in, I try and keep that within the area. So I kind of zoom in until I get just to the edge of this 2 foot tile, and then I know that the area that I'm filming is actually 2 feet. And this thing seemed to go behind the house rather than coming straight above it. It seems to be sort of going from the left to the right, and it's got some very strange rod-like structures that have come out on it. And I found this on a few of these. It's very, very, very strange, and never any sound from any of these things. I've done audio recordings, but I've never caught any sound at all. But I've got quite a large Geiger counter hit on this one, and I actually saw it in the viewing lens of the ultraviolet camcorder. I just wasn't sure what it was, and when I looked back at it, when I actually got home and put it onto the computer and had a look, I was totally amazed by the sort of thing that I'd captured. This is another one. There's a lot of people around the world who have captured these strange worm-like creatures and various things. A lot of them have been caught in places, like thousands of feet above the sea level. But this was the house roof again, and I got a huge Geiger counter hit, and I took a whole load of photographs in the infrared and didn't catch anything at all. But this came out just in 1 frame. It was moving quite fast, And you can see the inverted image gives you a bit more idea of the sort of shape of it. But some of these I've found are actually wriggling as if they're swimming through the sky. This one was travelling very fast though, and so I only caught it in the one frame. But people have caught these things sitting in the sky and wriggling, and they've even seen them laying what looks like eggs, small spheres, which seem to be held in place by some kind of magnetism. There's quite a lot of this sort of stuff on YouTube, and I think some of the Apollo missions filmed similar things as well. So this is a perfect example of life in the sky, just as Trevor James Constable said in his first book, They Live in the Sky. This is pretty typical of the amoeba type things that he was filming. They seem to be more biological than anything else. Okay, this is quite a common one. I've filmed quite a few of these. I only ever got 2 really clear ones, but this is taken above the next door neighbour's house. And you can see the general shape of it, although to me this is more like a sort of a biological fish-like sort of thing than I think of a craft, even though it does have propeller-like things at the back or fins or something. And I caught another one of these, which is that. That was taken a year apart from the other one. It seems to have the same features, which seem to be those fin-like things at the back. It's very hard to film these things because once they're out of the sunlight, when they pass over, they'll completely disappear. And they only appear just for a split second while they're being illuminated by the illumination zone that I set up. Here we can see the 2 similarities between the 2 objects that were captured a year apart. I've captured quite a few of these. I've caught a few of them sort of swimming in schools, a bit like fish. And I've got no idea what they are, but they seem to have this sort of fin-like thing at the back, which seems to be 4 fins, or like a tail fin-like appendages. I always seem to catch them side on as well. I've never caught any other angle. They always seem to be side on. And a lot of the photographs and a lot of the stills I've taken is on a house roof which goes from west to east. And I later found that a lot of these things seem to be swimming by moving on a west to east flow of some sort. And in some of the footage I've taken, you can actually see particles moving at quite a speed. And these things seem to be sort of caught up in that. I've caught a few going the opposite way, but most of them seem to be going in the same direction. I've probably caught about half a dozen of these that look pretty similar. And I've also caught other things as well, which look like jellyfish, but a lot of them don't show too well, just the very nature of them being infrared and ultraviolet reflected radiation. So I thought I'd bring some of the best ones along today, and some of these are taken from my book Quest for Invisibles. So these things just seem to be flying across the sky doing their own thing, and they seem to move pretty fast. I mean, a lot of them only appear on 1 frame, so I think with these particular ones I'd been filming I think all day for about 7 or 8 hours, and this is all I caught. I went through tens of thousands of frames, and this was all that sort of showed up in the end. And I was quite intrigued by this because I couldn't work out whether these were biological or whether there's some kind of craft or not, but I seem to sort of go with the biological idea, I think, for these. And this is another example, pretty typical shape that I've been capturing. It looks more like a fish than anything else. And I've captured a few of these, but this is by far the sort of clearest one that I've caught. And again, these things seem to be moving. This is moving from right to left. It seems to be moving backwards. And I only caught this one in the 1 frame as well. And they move at a hell of a speed. It's almost like they're going sort of like, maybe hundreds and hundreds of miles an hour, always in like a west to east sort of direction, which is quite strange. And this is pretty typical. A lot of the things I captured seem to have mouths, and they seem to have sort of tails as well. And it struck me they seem to be like fish or something. Now this is probably one of the better fish-like forms that I've caught. Now a lot of people talk about skyfish, and I started filming, but I found that a lot of the footage presented to skyfish are actually insects that have been stretched by the recording process. I've done a video about this called Skyfish Fact or Fiction. This appeared on 2 frames, and probably caught about a dozen of these, and they all seem to be in the same sort of position, sort of side on, and they've got clear tail sections and clear body sections. A lot of them seem to have a clear sort of a hollow pipe going through the middle of them. And a lot of them are filmed near the gable ends of the house, which is quite interesting. You see I'm using the gable end here to actually block the sun out. And you see the inverted image gives you more of an idea of the actual shape of it. So the more I seem to go out there, the more I kept catching fish-like shapes. This is one of about 6 stills caught of this particular one. And this thing wasn't swimming like a fish, it was spinning round and round, where the tail would be at the back, and the next minute the tail would be at the front. It was spinning round and round and round, and moving quite fast. And I've caught some of these actually in big schools together, but they've been very high in the sky. But I began like catching them. Once I started using the Cloudbuster, I found that these things seem to be coming in a lot nearer, and they all seem to be sort of near the gable ends or just above the top of the house. There's no idea really of how big this thing is, but you know, the area of roof you can see is about 2.5 to 3 foot of roof you're seeing there, and I'm slightly zoomed in, although this is enlarged a bit, so you know. The thing next to the fish is actually a cobweb that was blowing in the sky. I think it was attached somewhere on the house roof, so it looks a bit like an aeroplane trail, but it's not. So these sort of things seem to be quite common, and although Trevor never filmed any actual fish life forms, he did capture a lot of things that were similar. This was taken in 2016, so this was taken at 50 frames per second, and so I caught it in about 6 frames, and in each frame it looked different. It looked like it was going a different way, and it was spinning through itself. It's very hard to explain. It seems to be made of some kind of a plasma. Okay, so I filmed for probably about 5 years non-stop. I've shown you a few of the better things I've taken. My book, Quest of Invisibles, basically covers my first 5 years' work, and it includes a lot of these photographs. And I've also got a website called questofindivisibles.co.uk, and you'll see a lot of stuff that I filmed on there. And a lot of them seem to be these biological kind of forms. So this is what I did basically for 5 years. I'd film for 6-7 hours a day, and then I basically sit back looking through every single frame. And you know, it took weeks and weeks and weeks, and sometimes I just get like one image on one frame. I have to wear glasses now as a result of this, you see. So basically, as I explained, with the Geiger counter, the background radiation is normally 0.08 microsieverts per hour up to about 0.12. But sudden peaks of 0.20 or even higher, up to 0.5, have been known with some of these things. It's to do with the radiation they're actually giving off, which I'm not sure what it is. Because my Geiger counter, I can't tell between the radiations. All I do is get a hit. I've got it set to buzz, and then it goes up over 0.20 microsieverts per hour. So in the case of a camera, I'll just take multiple shots in that position and just hope for the best. So after I finished doing this, I really wanted to try and capture some different types. And the GRCU, I was very intrigued by what they'd captured. They filmed in darkness. Sometimes they'd use infrared flash lamps, and sometimes they film in complete darkness. And they try all sorts of settings on the camera. They would take anything up to like a minute. They would film for a minute, doing long exposures, or they'd film for like 10 seconds. But they caught some amazing stuff. And by using longer exposure, it really helps you to sort of to see the trail that's left by some of these objects. Okay, now I was out walking my dog one night, just in it's like a sort of a load of fields right out of the way. Suddenly started getting really, really high Geiger counter hits. I had an infrared camera with a 720 nanometer infrared pass filter, and I filmed in complete darkness. Basically, I took about 10 photographs as soon as I got the Geiger counter hit, and these came out on one photograph. And that was it. If we look, here we go, it's a bit more of a close-up. As you can see, I was getting a 0.3 microsievert per hour hit on this. This was filmed at 1/8 of a second. And you can see luminous corona on these, and also a trail, the one at the bottom. Within that 1/8 of a second, you can actually see the trail where this thing was moving. And I've caught a few of these things before, but this is very, very high in the sky. These were quite high, but near enough for me to, for them to sort of show sort of medium size in the photograph. And these things, even though they're like maybe 1,000 foot up in the sky, you'll still get a Geiger counter hit. So what I generally do is walk along with a Geiger counter in one hand, if I'm walking the dog, and a camera around my neck. And then the minute I get a hit, I just basically keep my camera pressed against my chest, aim up at 45 degrees, and just click, 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 click. Now most of the time I don't catch anything. I mean, I filmed for years at night, and sometimes I won't catch anything for months and months. And then just as I'm about to give up, I think, oh, can I carry on with this? Something else comes along, something like this. Okay, so this is another one. I was sitting in my garden one night. I had the camera set up on a tripod, had the Geiger counter there. I kept getting multiple hits, took loads and loads of photographs, didn't catch anything, and the hits were getting higher and higher. So I turned direction and basically took 2 photographs, and this is the second one. This actually took up about a third of the actual size of the screen, and it was photographed above 100-foot trees. The camera was at a 45-degree angle. I saw nothing at all, nothing at all. Got a massive Geiger counter hit. took these photographs, and I was quite surprised when I actually looked at the photographs and found that, you know, this was in there. Here we are, looking at it in a bit more detail. Rather than this being a light that seems to be travelling, it seems to be a solid structure, and you can see areas that are unlit and a continuation of the main object on the bottom left. Several sections seem to be unlit, and there seems to be a second object at the top. And the only reason you're seeing this is because of the reflected radiation from the heat source in the middle, and that seems to be enough to light up the second object. This is the only thing that I've caught like this. I haven't caught anything similar, but massive Geiger counter hits. They were going on for ages, and I'm not sure whether this thing was actually moving around the garden, well, moving above the garden, or what. But I was using a Cloudbuster this evening. Been using it for about an hour. So this is above like 100-foot trees, and this was the only photograph that came out of all of the photographs that I took that night, despite getting really high Geiger counter hits. So I'm convinced this is part of a much larger craft, but you know, it must have been quite big. I think, because the fact it was above 100-foot trees, and I didn't use any zoom at all, just basically took the photograph at 45 degrees straight above the tree, like snap, snap, and this thing's shown up. So I'm convinced this is part of a much larger craft, but obviously it's invisible because I captured it in infrared. I didn't see anything at all, nothing at all, didn't sense anything, didn't see anything. Now, there's just some more recent stuff that I've captured through May. This is pretty typical of a lot of things I seem to capture. Again, the last photograph was taken with no flash, and this was taken with no flash, just complete darkness. And these are all taken on Geiger counter hits that I got, ranging anything up to about 5.5 microsieverts per hour. And some of these objects would actually split. I've seen them. Well, I've seen other people's footage showing these things splitting and joining back together, and I've actually seen them in the visible light spectrum doing the same sort of thing. Because of the amount of trees around where I live, it's very hard when you're out and you see something to actually catch it. These things move so fast a lot of the time. These particular ones, I think the one on the bottom left corner, I caught that in about 5 different shots. And the one on the bottom right was one of about 5 orbs that were travelling quite high in the sky, and each of them were a different colour. It looks very, very strange. But I've seen these things split and then form back together again. I've seen them come into the visible light spectrum, shoot off, and then join back up together again. You know, and I always assume things like this were, you know, craft and things. But, you know, the more and more I've looked into this, I'm more and more convinced that these things are actually entities in their own right. And I believe that some of the craft are actually entities as well. Some of these, I don't know if people here have heard of summoning. A lot of people are doing UFO summoning nowadays. Well, they'll go out and they'll just concentrate on the sky and basically ask that if there's anything there, any invisible bits in the things in the sky, you know, can they come over? A lot of these things appear in the visible light spectrum. There's a whole load of people filming these things, but a lot of them seem to sort of just disappear and go straight into the invisible. But they seem to be able to communicate telepathically, and I had an experience for about 2 months where I'd go out, I'd look at the sky, concentrate on the sky, relax my eyes, and I would ask, you know, are there any benevolent beings out there in the sky who want to make themselves visible to me or appear in the infrared? And especially at the time when I was getting my book together, and lo and behold, some of these things started appearing. They seemed to come in at about 3,000 foot in the sky, and they'd come down and move over the house. Many of them looked like balloons in the daytime, or things that just couldn't have been explained. But these were actually taken at night with no flash. And it's very common. The GRCU filmed a lot of things like this, and in some cases these things would actually turn into entities which had like halos and horns, or sometimes they just turn into a mist and then just totally disappear. So this is the sort of thing that I've been filming for quite a while at night, using no flash. Okay, now the other option, I found sometimes when I'm out in the garden, I'll suddenly get massive high Geiger counter hits in each direction. And as I've said before, some of these things need illuminating to appear in the infrared or the ultraviolet. So it's obvious that they're coming from somewhere into the infrared or into the ultraviolet. Now some of them are self-illumined, but in the case where they're not, I actually started using a standard camera flash on the infrared camera. Now the white of the camera flash, the white light, the infrared camera can only see a small amount of the red that appears, the barely visible red that appears just before the infrared. But I found that it's often enough to light these things up. Now this particular day I was out in the garden, I got multiple hits on the Geiger counter, and I must have taken about 100 photographs in each direction. And I caught 3 photographs showing these things, and they were shooting up out the ground, actually straight out the ground and straight up into the sky. pretty near. I found that using the flash can illuminate things within probably about 100 feet. You'll find that you'll get some kind of illumination from the flash. And I didn't see anything at all when I took this photograph. I was very, very amazed, but my dogs seemed to pick it up. The dogs started whimpering, and one of them wanted to go in the house. He wouldn't sit in the garden anymore. He started to get very disturbed. So I believe that animals can see the infrared. They can see a lot of these things that we can't see. So often the animals are sort of an indicator to this kind of phenomenon. Very, very often. Yeah, you have to excuse my medication for my back. It's 1:30 if I keep drinking. So. Now this was taken on the automatic setting, which is 1/60th of a second, and I found that's a pretty good setting to use when you're taking photographs in the dark. I generally try and use something to put the camera on, a tripod, but if I'm out and about and I haven't got a tripod, what I do is I keep the camera on my neck and I press it against my chest and then basically tilt it and then just press, and it stops things moving. You don't seem to get a blur or anything. But I've done this I was using a red colour balance. There's an automatic colour balance which leans towards red because the sensors tend to lean towards red because you're filming in the infrared. And there's a black and white version of it next to it. But you can alter the white balance to anything you want really. In the daytime I tend to set it to green grass, and that gives you the whiteness which you saw in one of the other photographs where it showed the trees looking white, the tree foliage. This is another example. I was out in the garden one night and my dog started acting very, very strange. It was looking up at the tree and I couldn't see anything. All of a sudden I started getting a guide counter hit. I must have taken about 100 photographs. I was out in the garden for ages. Didn't catch anything at all. And all of a sudden I got this feeling that I was being watched, and it was very overpowering. The hairs went up on the back of my neck. Didn't feel right at all. And I just took multiple photographs in the infrared all around the house. You can see the TV aerial from the house. So this thing wasn't that high above. And this sort of came out just in one of the photographs. It only showed in the one photograph, but the animals could definitely pick up on it. My dog Elfie and Lucy, they seem to be very disturbed when these things are around. It's got to the point now where one of my dogs won't even go upstairs into my room anymore. It seems to sense a lot of things up there. And the Geiger counter will often go off when I'm in my room, which is a bit unnerving. Yeah. So these are pretty typical of some of the things that the GRC captured, and some of the things that I've been capturing over the years. These are probably some of the best sort of captures that I'm showing you now. But these things seem to be able to change shape. They seem to be able to change their luminosity. They seem to be able to phase in and out of the visible light spectrum. Although most of the things I've captured are only invisible, but I've actually seen some of them appear just for a split second in the visible light spectrum and then disappear again. I've actually found that when I'm leaving a camera rolling, these things will appear on the visible light spectrum for a second, like they're just flashing into this reality, and then they'll go back. But yet they're picked up in the infrared permanently. So it's almost like they're just hanging just beyond the realms of human sight. Okay, so this is the conclusion of this. So say from the work that was done by Trevor James Constable and the GRCU, initially they were looking for craft, and although they did film some craft, the craft they filmed seemed to be rather sort of etheric, and they seemed to capture the energy around the craft rather than the actual craft itself. And a lot of the craft, I filmed pyramid-like craft and I filmed V-shaped craft, but a lot of them seem to be very, very, very high in the sky. And what I found, when I talk about UFOs, I split them into 3 different areas. I say there are craft up there, and I filmed, like the example I filmed with those lights that are going across, that seemed to be to me a physical structured craft, although it appeared in the infrared. But I'd say that a lot of these things that are being seen are sky creatures coming into the visible and then going back into the invisible. Now, a lot of these sky creatures seem to be able to change form, although a lot of them can seem to stay in the form that they're in. I've captured a lot of the fish-like forms, and they always look the same, but I've captured other things that just seem to form into any kind of shape, and a lot of them doesn't really make sense. The Trevor James Constable used infrared film, but because of the cost of it and the development time, that's why I decided to go digital with this. And I'll often film with I'll use a CCTV camera or a standard camera in the visible spectrum filming at the same time, and I've noticed a lot of these things don't come out at all. But so a lot of people now are doing this summoning, and this is where the sky beings come in. From the work I've seen by other people and from what I've noticed, I'd say a lot of these craft-like objects seem to be the entity themselves. They seem to be able to change. They'll start off looking like a sphere, and then they'll change into something which resembles a craft. And a lot of the people doing summoning, they're getting these things coming up about 2,000-3,000 foot in the sky. A lot of them start off looking like discs, and then they'll change. They'll end up looking like life forms. So I'm convinced that, you know, there's an area about 3,000 foot in the sky where these things seem to be coming into the visible. You can capture them obviously in the infrared and the ultraviolet. A lot of them stay invisible and they'll come right above the houses and things. And it's got to the point now where I can kind of sense them. All the hair sort of goes on edge on the back of my neck. And say the dogs start acting, I'll get very, very high Geiger counter readings. So I'd say a lot of these things, a lot of the UFOs, there are craft out there, but I'd say that a lot of the UFOs are actually actual sky creatures. And some of them seem to be sort of sky beings, and these sky beings seem to be telepathic. I mean, say all you have to do is look up at the sky and ask in your mind for these things to appear, and they will appear. You know, a lot of the time invisible as well, but they're very, very high in the sky, and unless you've got the equipment, they're very, very hard to film because they're so high in the sky. But I've been filming now I started off in 2010, filmed right through to about 2015. And then a lot of strange things started happening. I got my cat Roy put down because he was very, very ill. And I started filming around Roy's gravesite, and I started getting energy coming out. I take these photos in pitch darkness. I was getting snake-like entities and lights coming out of the grave. And I've got a website, questforinvisibles.co.uk, and there's a lot of this footage on there. But I never saw anything at the time. These things seem to be able to kind of manifest from somewhere into the infrared. So they're obviously existing, you know, on some wavelength. And whether it is they can speed up their vibration, or whether they're using some kind of technology or some kind of way for scattering light, it's very, very hard to know. So I've gone on to film a whole lot of things, including entities. I noticed in my garden around this time that I was getting a lot of hits when I went for a walk around the garden on the Geiger counter, and I started taking photographs. The minute that I got the hit on the Geiger counter, I actually started filming entities. So I got 4 photographs of entities in my greenhouse window. The first one looked like an ET. The first one, sorry, looked like a Napoleonic guy. The second one looked like an ET. The third one looked like some kind of a being with horns, and it had some kind of a creature like sitting on its lap that had horns. It looked a bit like a cat, but it's either horns or ears. And then I caught another strange being, and I started capturing like light trails in the sky, which I've taken quite a few of in the past. And within these light trails sometimes, I've actually caught little sort of pixie-like entities that seem to be making the light trails. This is why I like to film with 15-second exposures or longer if I can, because it gives you a chance to see these things actually forming and then appearing. But so very often these things, you can film some of this phenomena on normal standard cameras, because I think these digital cameras and camcorders are very, very sensitive. And you'll see things that appear on the footage that you actually can't see with your own eyes. So, you know, you don't have to go and get infrared or ultraviolet equipment to capture these things. I think, you know, I've seen a lot of good stuff captured on a standard camcorder. And some of these things have appeared on the standard camcorder. Even though the standard camcorder is meant to be seeing just the visible light spectrum, I filmed things on it that I've not seen myself. So I think on a clear blue sky, when you've got a day where it's like really sunny and you've got a clear blue sky, I think that these things, you know, they will show up, even though you don't actually see them yourself. So, you know, I wrote my first book, Quest for the Invisibles. I started to put all my notes together in the end of 2015. I only really did it for myself. I was going to self-publish just a couple of copies. But I wrote off to Trevor James Constable's publisher, Paul Tice of the Book Tree, and he was very interested in what I was doing, because at the time Trevor was very ill. Now, he started filming back in the 1950s, and he retired in the 1980s and began using Cloudbuster for weather engineering, creating rain, which is the reason Dr. Wilhelm Reich actually built the Cloudbuster. He could manipulate weather, he could bring rain where there was no rain, he could change weather fronts by manipulating the ether. So I decided to just carry on filming. I've gone to film a lot of stuff now, which obviously missed the book, because the book was published in September 2016. So if you look on my website, you'll find a whole load of sections on strange phenomena. I've got entities, I've got all sorts of strange light trails, whole load of things that are happening, strange objects, some of the ones that I've shown you tonight. And there's a lot of people doing this now. I didn't realise at the time, but I'm getting emails from all over the world now. I'm starting to do a few talks like this, and quite a few radio stations have been interested in it. There seems to be more and more people are looking into the infrared now. I'm convinced that a lot of these realities are existing, you know, parallel to this visible reality of ours. And I found things that have basically come into the infrared and then gone straight back out again, and they're just totally invisible. Where some seem to be their own light source, and some seem to rely on reflecting either moonlight or sunlight. So it's very hard to tell, but you know, these things will come down, and I believe they're all around us all the time. And while there may be craft, actual physical craft, perhaps with connections to the military, I believe that many of the craft that people are seeing, just as Trevor Jones Constable found, these disc-shaped objects and cigar-shaped objects, to me, I'm convinced that a lot of them, a good majority of them, are actual living life forms. They seem to be capable of taking any form they want. Now, a lot of them appear to be made of plasma. A lot of them look very, very metallic, and they seem to be able to, within that, you know, rather than being carbon-based, they seem to be able to change into anything they want. And I sometimes wonder whether all these different fish-shaped things I'm getting, because I had a very big interest in skyfish, and then all of a sudden I started filming loads and loads of these actual fish-like forms. So, you know, I always wonder whether some of these things may be reading your thoughts and appearing, you know, for you. Because the amount of times I've gone out, especially when I was just about to finish my book, I thought I haven't got enough photographs, so I started going out a lot and sort of looking up into the sky and saying, you know, if there's any invisible forms up there that want to be in my book, you know, now is your time to appear. And I caught some very good photographs. I mean, a lot of them can't be really shown because they're quite small. They appear okay in the book, but they don't appear, they won't show very well because they're very, very bright white infrared radiation. One of the best ones I caught was a police helicopter that was going over. And I took a series of photographs of the helicopter, about 10 photographs, and in one photograph, it's almost like a half of a human body. It's like the head and the arms. It's just sitting there, just above the police helicopter. The helicopter was there for about an hour, going round and round. And I've had a lot of problems with these myself. Many times when I've been out filming with the Cloudbuster, I've had like military helicopters come over. And there was an incident about 2 months ago where I was on the phone talking to someone about the plans I was going to do, certain things I was going to do with the Cloudbuster. And within about 15 minutes, a Sea King helicopter came over, a yellow Sea King with no markings on it apart from a red cross. And where I live, I've got like a sister's house, it's an acre of land, a little forested area on one side and the house in the middle. This thing came across about 20 foot above the trees, which are about 100 foot. And these three guys were like looking down, and they stayed there for 10 minutes. And I looked up, and I see this guy like looking out the helicopter, you know, straight down at me. And I started getting weird things happening. The phone would be rang. I started getting like, the phone kept ringing. We started getting like strange things going on, and started getting cars watching me. And for a period about a year ago, there was a black car at the end of my road with a man and a woman in it. You know, they looked like typical Men in Black type people. And I was thinking, oh, I'm just being paranoid, And as I walked past them, the guy dropped a walkie-talkie down the side, and he turned to the woman. He says, "Oh, that's the male we're interested in." And around this time, I'd sent one of my cameras off to the United States to get converted into full spectrum. And what happened was, it'd been about a week, and I thought, well, where is it? I rang up the company. They said, "Oh, we haven't got it yet." And I've been tracing it, seeing where it was going. And I noticed it went into Kennedy Airport. I thought, well, it must be there soon. Another couple of weeks went by. I rang the firm up, and they said, "Oh, we haven't had it yet." I thought, well, that's weird. And I looked on the airport information. It said, "Oh, this object has been taken off for inspection." And that was around the time when I started getting these cars following me. And they followed me for 2 months. They were sitting up the end of the road. And then every time I got on the bus, by myself with my sister, the bus would mysteriously stop, about a stop out of Abingdon. And these two guys would get on. One of them had ripped jeans, and he looked about in his late 60s. It didn't make sense really. They got on, they didn't use a bus ticket. They showed like a little plastic card. And they would stand at the front of the bus like this, just sort of smiling at me and looking at me, and every now and then they'd wink at me, and it was really unnerving. So I started playing a few games with them. I'd go out in a friend's car, put different clothes on, get my friend to drop me off somewhere, and then I'd climb back over the fence back into my garden and do things like that. And it started getting pretty full on. Started getting like emails, and there's a lot of people out there that are anti-Cloudbusters, anti-Trevor Jones Constable. I started getting some very negative stuff. For some reason, somebody found out my name, and I'm not sure my phone number. And the only way they could have found that out was from the website, I think, because that's the only place I really put my phone number out on. But I had a lot of problems. Kept getting viruses and strange things hitting things. The website would go down, and I'd get it going back up again, and it was crazy. And at one point, the moment I put my computer on, I'd get my antivirus would say that there was up to 100 IP addresses trying to get into my computer. So I had to take my computer offline in the end and get another computer. But I was just plagued with all these cars following me and helicopters, and the more and more I was started doing talks and putting this stuff out there, the more and more my life got completely sort of weird. So as far as I'm concerned, there are craft out there. And whether they come from other planets or not, I don't know. I'm more of the opinion that these things are coming from other dimensions rather than other planets. And some of them seem to be able to take whatever form they want, and whether that's to sort of disguise themselves to us, I don't know. And also, I've seen things that have looked like one thing to me, and somebody else has seen it, and it's looked like totally different to them. So I don't know whether or not they're manipulating the way we see things. Obviously, they're appearing within the visible light spectrum, which goes from red through to violet. These things are existing just outside them, whether it's the infrared, which is before the red, or whether it's the ultraviolet, which is after the violet. But the sky seems to be full of these things. I mean, Trevor Constable described them as, plasmatic fauna, and he thought a lot of them were kind of like basic animal forms. But I'm getting more and more convinced that a lot of these things, especially the sky beings, are actually quite intelligent, and they seem to be able to take any form they want, and they seem to latch onto certain people. There's a lot of people that I know that have been filming, and they've been plagued by things. They've had like beings showing up in the house, and I had an occasion where my Geiger counter went off, and one of my dogs started getting really nervous, and got my camera out, and I was actually scared at this point. I've conquered my fear now, but these things, something appeared in my room. I tried to take a photograph with my infrared camera, which cost 400 quid for the camera and 400 quid to get it turned into infrared, plus about £200 in postage. Took a photograph, the camera just conked out totally, it never worked again. Sent it back to Canon. They said all the inside of it had been melted by some strange energy. So it left me with no camera. So I had to basically go out and get another camera. But I've had quite a lot of things that have failed. I've had hard drives that have failed, computer that just gave up, and when they looked at it, they said that things were corrupted on it and stuff. They couldn't get it going again. All sorts of problems from the particular energy that these things seem to be putting out. And the more you look into this, and the more you get out there and put this stuff out there seems to be a lot of people out there that don't want this kind of information going out. I'm convinced that they've been brainwashing us for years, bringing in the films like E.T. and stuff like that, making sure that each subsequent generation has it ingrained in them that there are beings from other planets. Whereas I'm convinced that a lot of these aren't from other planets. I think they're from other realities, and I think some are probably here, being benevolent, but a lot of them, I think, aren't benevolent. It's always hard to know, So that's pretty much what I've been doing since 2010. I use a Cloudbuster a lot of the time, as I said. I'm still using Cloudbuster. I've just built one with 8 tubes, but I'm doing all this work myself, and it takes a long time to do, because you've got to film for this sort of 6-7 hours with 3 cameras. Then you've got to go back and look through every single frame, because some of these things will appear just on one frame. So, it's very, very time consuming, but the results are well worth it. And my book, Quest Invisibles, which I've got some copy of in here, that covers my first 5 years of work filming these sort of things. And the stuff that I've filmed more recently is actually on the website. I've got some pictures of entities on there, pictures of all sorts of strange things, and that's www.questinvisibles.co.uk. So I'm also going out with a friend soon. I had something that happened to me very strange going back about 10 years ago. I was walking down a path, and I heard something following me to the left. It was a pitch dark path, and it was a shortcut down to my friend's house. I'd missed the bus. Decided to actually go down this shortcut, which went down something called Live Alley, which is like a little nature reserve. It's only about a 20-minute walk, and I heard something crunching to the left of me, following me, and every time I stopped, this thing would give an extra crunch, and this went on twice, and I started getting really, really scared. And all of a sudden, I started to sort of jog, and then I stopped, and this thing made 2 or 3 more footsteps, and it went like that, and I couldn't see anything at all. And I've since been back there, and the area where this thing was is full of like little tributaries, and it goes down by about 4 or 5 foot, deep vegetation. There's no way anything could walk through there in the dark. And I've had a lot of strange things like this going on since I've been looking into this kind of stuff. I've been sitting in the garden having a cigarette, and all of a sudden I've heard footsteps coming through the leaves, running at me. And a lot of the time, in the beginning, I'd run upstairs, and I'd be really worried like that. But I've had to kind of conquer the fear, really, because I think a lot of these things do feed on the fear. I've become pretty convinced of that. But I think that once you start looking into the invisible world, the invisible world starts opening itself up to you, and it can become pretty full on at times. I mean, I'm on a break at the moment. I'm taking about 2 or 3 months off filming, because when you're doing this stuff 24 hours a day, and it's all you've been doing for for 8 years or so, it just becomes, you become extra sensitive. You're sitting there at home, and you suddenly think you feel something. You'll turn around, and I don't tend to have a Geiger counter on in the house now, because I don't really want to know what sort of things are happening there. But I've had lights going on and off. I've had objects move. I've had my computer switched off, especially when I was writing my book Quest Invisibles. which I wrote on Word. I mean, I'd never written a book before. I was, kind of just feeling my way, trying to do it. I wasn't sure what to do, but I'd go upstairs and find that the computer had been switched off and everything I'd been working on hadn't been saved. And it was an absolute nightmare. I had to keep going back and rewriting things. And then all of a sudden, something really strange happened. I was out filming one day and decided to pack up. I went back to the back of the garden to get my tripod with my full spectrum camcorder, and it disappeared, completely gone. It was a £600 camcorder. I mean, that cost me nearly £1,000. So that's one camera that's gone, completely disappeared, never seen it again. And we've got security gates in our garden, so I don't know where it went. The tripod was there, but the camera had gone, and yet I'd not seen anybody. So I had a lot of problems like that. It's almost like I feel sometimes that, there's a certain energy out there that doesn't want some of this stuff to come out. And this is very strange. It's very, very, very strange. But I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep filming and stuff. I've got to watch for the Cloudbuster because obviously they keep sending police helicopters over us, my area. And the Cloudbuster looks like some kind of a rocket launcher and stuff like that. But I'm sure they must have my address written down somewhere, because when that big helicopter came, I could hear it for about 15 minutes getting nearer and nearer, and then it stopped right above the house. And I thought they were actually going to, all the neighbours come up saying, what's happening? Is someone being lifted out the garden, rescued and that. And my sister said, what do you think's happening? Do you think it's, it's a practice? I said, oh yeah, and yeah, probably a practice. Said nothing to do with me. And I kind of went back inside, my heart was going like that, And they were up there looking down at my Cloudbuster, and they must have had my phone tapped to have known that I was out there doing it. And at the time, a friend of mine suggested to me, why don't you get the radioactive element from an alarm and put that on the Cloudbuster pipes to try and bring down some of these chemtrails. And that's what we were talking about at the time. And I said, oh, I might try that. I said, I think I've got an old fire alarm. But I didn't know enough about it. I didn't want to start mucking around because I believed that, it might create some massive swathe of radiation. And I'm convinced that this helicopter, when it came over, they were actually looking at the radiation levels in my garden. So yeah, when you look into this sort of thing, it can become quite unnerving sometimes, and you'll find cars watching you and things like that, and strange things happening. I've had phone calls where I've answered the phone and all I could just hear people talking, and no one says hi Nick or anything like that. People, it just goes completely blank. And people who ring me have said that they can hear strange things going on. And this happens to a lot of UFO people. A lot of people are into this sort of thing. But that's it. But I'm convinced there are craft up there. I'm not sure whether the military, are using craft. I've heard all sorts of stories about these deep underground bases and the fact that the military are using these craft. But what I say to people is, people see these lights in the skies and they say, oh, look, there's something that's come from another planet. But, I always say, why would something come from another planet all the way up into the sky above you just to flash a few lights at you in the sky? Why would they? I'm convinced that a lot of these things are out there anyway, especially the sky beings. They're always up there. And I think if you want to see something, you will, and they pick up on it and they'll make sure you see something. So it doesn't make sense to me that a lot of these things that are being seen are craft, because obviously some of them are disc-shaped, some are cigar-shaped. And as Trevor found out, a lot of these seem to be something, when looked at in great deal, seem to be something from under the microscopical world. A lot of them have markings on them that look like amoeba. Many of them will change their forms, just within, like for instance, there's a couple of pictures in my book where I caught a craft, some strange looking craft objects. I suddenly just had, I was just about to pack up for the night and I decided to take 3 shots for luck, and I just basically grabbed my camera, pointed up in the sky, went 1, 2, 3, got the footage back, and there's a strange craft, and it's really weird, it's hard to describe it. It looked like a glider with really fat wings, and then in the next photograph, these photographs are taken about 1/10,000 of a second. In the next photograph, the thing looked totally different, like it morphed into something totally different. And in the third photograph, there's nothing there at all. So I carried on taking photographs of the sky in infrared and never caught anything at all. But it's almost like I had a sense that it was up there. It's almost like I knew when to take the photograph. And I found that very often I'll go out and get the urge to photograph. I'll take like a couple of hundred photographs and I'll find just one thing, exactly where I was looking. But a lot of them are very sort of keep out of sight. So a lot of them seem to be sort of about 3,000 foot in the sky. And unless you use a Cloudbuster or something to bring them a bit lower, it's very, very hard to photograph these things, which is why I began filming in the Ultraviolet. And I found a lot of the things I filmed in the Ultraviolet were a lot lower, and a lot of them seem to be like fish-like forms and other strange forms that don't make any sense at all. So I don't know, I'm only scratching the surface of it really. I'm going to do another book at some point. I'm going to carry on carry on filming and just putting all my evidence out there. But basically, everything that I've done is really summed up in my book, Quest to Invisibles, and that's about as far as I've got with books at the moment. But I do intend to keep putting this stuff out, and I'm going to try and get a few more of my friends involved and go out there and film with multiple cameras, try and get loads and loads of cameras and try and get different devices for detecting whether these things are there or not. Because it's a bit of full on when you're doing it all yourself. You know, you've got to go out into the garden, set all the equipment up. You know, you've got like an infrared camera filming in movie mode, you've got an infrared camera around your neck, you've got like a full spectrum camcorder which you can put a filter on and like block visible light and infrared, just film infrared, or you can film, I've got one called the Xmas UVR, and that basically blocks the visible light spectrum but films infrared and ultraviolet at the same time. So you've got to set all these things up, you know, then get on the Cloudbuster, start filming, and then you film for 6-7 hours, and then basically you then go back home and load it all onto the computer, and you've got like, you know, maybe 6 hours of footage on each camera. And then what I have to do is like locate something interesting and then basically find the same place on all the other cameras and go through it all. And it took me weeks and weeks. I think the longest I spent was 2 months, every single day, like, you know, 7 or 8 hours just looking through footage. And my eyesight used to be really good, but it's not now. I'm finding that I have to wear glasses for reading now, but I've got excellent long sight, which is quite good. So I'd basically say, you know, in my opinion, you know, I'd say a big percentage of the UFOs that are there are these sky beings and sky creatures. Sky creatures, many of them seem to keep the form they're in. They seem to be like living creatures, whereas the sky beings seem to change. They can look like a craft, they can look like a ball of light, they can split, and especially at night, I've seen them look like stars, and I've seen them split into 2 or 3 other star-like things, then come back together again in multicolours. And sometimes I've seen them going through the sky. I've got photographs in the infrared that look like triangular lights, which look like it's a triangular craft, but in fact in the next stills that I've taken, you can see these lights moving nearer. So they're not, although they look like they're part of a, you know, a triangular physical craft, they're not. But they seem to be able to move in perfect alignment with each other. You know, they give the impression that they're part of a much larger object when they're not. They're actually just lights. And these things will come to you. If you go out there at night and you look into the sky and you ask if there's any benevolent beings out there, because you need to know that these things are benevolent. You know, you need to know that they're coming in the name of the light, or, you know, whoever you pray to or whatever. You know, I always started protecting myself once I started getting a lot of negative things happening. And I seem to have lost the fear now. But I definitely think there's a fight going on between these entities and things, you know, for the human soul. I think there's some here that are here to help us, some here that are probably not here to help us, some more sort of negativity. So I'm just going to carry on with my work, filming in the infrared, filming in the ultraviolet. I mean, a few of my friends have got cameras that film sort of like, you know, the heat and stuff like that, but I always find it's not a clear enough picture. I like to get like a photograph type picture rather than something that's made up of green, you know, yellow, green and red light. So if any of you are interested in photographing things, I mean, you could just try taking random photographs with a standard non-infrared camera or just a camcorder. You know, you could stand there and try asking these things if they appear. You could just leave yourself filming and see what happens. So, yeah, okay. So, any questions anyone would like to ask?
Yeah. How does the Cloudbuster and why does it attract the light?
Yeah, the Cloudbuster. Okay, it's basically a load of pipes that are grounded in water, and the water's running. You've got a constant load of water running, and what it seems to do, it creates a pull. What I've noticed with my Cloudbuster, when I walk near it with a hiker's compass, within about 2 foot, it will spin the compass right round, totally the wrong way. You know, it seems to affect it like that. But it was speculated by Dr. Wilhelm Reich that it would manipulate the ether, which seems to underlie, you know, atmospheric movement, and he found that he could dissipate clouds with it, i.e. why it's called a Cloudbuster, or he could actually create rain. And there's a guy called Don Croft. He went out to the Great Lakes of Africa and he used a Cloudbuster to bring in rain and try and fill the Great Lakes. But you know, a lot of these people aren't. They're getting their work, you know, it's being kept under. It's almost like they don't want this kind of thing to go out there. But it's definitely an etheric force that's being manipulated by the Cloudbuster. I don't get any kind of a hit on the Geiger counter, but it's a constant running of the water. I put a hose in at the top, and then I've got like water coming out, and so there's a constant flow of water. But it seems to create some kind of a draw, and it's that draw that seems to be able to unfasten the clouds in the sky. It breaks up something that's holding the clouds, like the ether, and the clouds will just dissipate. But you know, I'm only basically using the Cloudbuster just for UFO attraction. I'm not really into the weather engineering. I don't know enough about it. You know, I leave that to other sort of people. But the pipes that I used were off a gazebo, which my sister had. I was thinking, I'd love to build a Cloudbuster. I can't get the bits. My sister says, "Oh, can you get rid of that old gazebo?" And it had all the pipes on it. I thought, wow. And when I started off, there was no magnetic force on it at all. They weren't magnetic in one bit. But within 2 weeks of using it as a Cloudbuster, I say these things will spin a hiker's compass round about 2 feet away from it. So there's definitely something being created, some kind of magnetic anomaly as well. And I think this is what attracts the creatures. Trevor found the same, and the GRCU used Cloudbusters. But for some reason, the creatures seem to be home in on a particular energy which is coming off from the Cloudbuster.
So can you put it into a stream, for instance?
Yeah, a stream's probably the best way because you've got a continuous running water. Yeah, Trevor James Constable used to go out into the Mojave Desert and he'd put them into a stream which gave even more of a pull. I've got to rely on, I use an old dustbin upside down and I've got a hose going in there, then I've got a pipe coming out. It is a bit wasteful of water, so I have to sort of do it when my sister's out. But I'm trying to get some kind of a motor that I can pump it back up in again, but obviously, it's hard. It's expensive, all this.
Can you tell me what you think orbs might be? I have been for a long time, I don't know now, taking pictures in my house in the same area, asking the orbs to come. I've got loads of pictures of them, big, little. Sometimes it goes dark on one side of the picture, as though some energy is taken. And in the next one, there'll be that orb, and some of them are really big, and I've got loads of pictures of them. Yeah,
well, some of them have faces as well. I believe that the best way for energy to travel is in an orb shape, and the GRCU filmed orbs that would come in, and as they reach ground level, they'd turn into these little entities. I say some would have antennae, some would have horns. And I saw some really good footage that someone took. It was on the scene where 3 guys had been killed in a car crash, and there was an orb coming down, and as it got to about head height, it just turned into a ghostly figure of a bloke walking. I believe it's a natural way for energy to move around in an orb shape, in a spherical shape. But I believe a lot of them are entities. I believe that...
Could they be dead souls?
I believe some of them probably could be.
Obviously some of them have died. Could it be...
It could be. I'm sure that people can take that form because I've seen a lot of footage of ghostly things that have come from an orb. But I've seen orbs way up in the sky, like the ones that I showed. There was a bright one that I showed in one of the photographs earlier. And I've seen them split into 2 or 3 other orbs and then come back together again. But they seem to have an intelligence, and the fact that they kind of know that you're asking them to come. But some of them may be souls, yeah. But I've filmed dozens of them together.
I usually get several in the picture. A little tiny one that grows, bigger.
Yeah.
And then a big one.
I think it's a form of energy.
When it was bright like a sun at one side.
Were you using a flash when you took the photograph? Yeah. No, because a flash can often light them up, but I've taken quite a few in pitch darkness.
It's a very cheap camera, actually.
Yeah.
I've got a better one now.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of orbs that may be down to dust or something like that. It's surprising. Oh no, I'm not saying they are, but it's a lot of things. It's very easy to take photographs, and even moisture in the air. I went out one night when it was raining and took a load of pictures of the flash, and it looked like thousands of orbs. But I think that energy, it's the best way for energy to move around, I think, in a spherical form. So they could be anything. They could be...
I just flash with... No, not asking. I don't get them. So
no, what that tells you that...
So I don't know what you are, but please, you make me know more. Can I take a picture of you?
Yeah. And you don't see anything at the time? No, well, I saw an orb. I saw an actual orb. It came through the kitchen wall when I was having a lot of this paranormal stuff going out. And my dogs were really, really scared. One of them went into the corner and was snarling, and I got a very, very uneasy feeling. And that was the first time that I noticed anything paranormal going, because I'd always thought, to go back to it, when I first read Trevor James Constable's books, that was the first time I'd even heard that UFOs could be anything other than craft. I didn't know they could be invisible, and I didn't know they could actually be biological. I always thought that UFOs were craft from other planets and they were transport things, and I used to think that the paranormal was very different to the UFO thing, but I think they're very interlocked. Very, very interlocked. And yeah. Yeah. Yeah, another question?
Have you taken many photographs of crop circles around?
No, I haven't. I've been to them though, and I've noticed Geiger counter, but no, I haven't yet. No, because I don't drive. You see, this is the problem. Got a few back problems, so I tend not to get out. I'm a bit of a loner. I mean, I've barely left my house for the last 12 years. I don't really go out. I just spend all my time filming and doing bits and bobs. So, yeah. Oh.
What sort of percentage of things that you see can you see with your naked eye, and has that increased?
No, there is a way of just focusing your eyes and seeing invisible things, but they don't seem to appear in the visible light spectrum. But very rarely I've seen. On my website, you'll see a video. I've got a Quest for Invisible's YouTube channel. Now, one day I was filming from the garden and I saw this tiny ball which was visible. It must have been about 3,000 foot. And as I zoomed in, it looked like an egg stood up and it had like radar dishes coming out the side of it. And as I zoomed in, it was almost like it knew, and it turned round. And as it turned round, it changed in form and it looked teardrop shaped. It didn't make any sense because it looked like an egg from various angles. And then as soon as it turned right round, it became like a teardrop. And it was almost like it was morphing. It knew that I was watching it. And there's a video of that, the actual live video that I took. You'll see me just looking in the sky, you see a little thing, and I'll zoom into it. And you'll see this thing turn around. It's got like radar dishes. But I believe these are sky beings. People have caught footage of these things morphing and changing all the time. And these things will come very low down, especially if you're there asking them. But I don't see many in the visible light spectrum. No, most of the stuff I see is Infra Red or Ultraviolet. So, oh, sorry. Mm. Oh yeah. Yeah, the problem is the visible light spectrum is being decoded. Yeah, it's being decoded by our bodies. This is the thing. And some of these might be able to affect how it's decoded. I'm not sure whether it's them doing it or whether it's you, but obviously some people can see things other people can't see. Where's the other?
It's actually something good because it resonates with me on a couple of books like have you come across Nik Hayes?
Yeah, I've seen Nik Hayes on television, but I'm not a massive book reader, funny enough. I mean, Cosmic Reports of Life was probably the first proper book I read in my life when I was, like 30. I've never been a big book reader, but I watch a lot of telly. I've seen Nik Hayes fan. Yeah, I mean, there's been a few talks he's done, but because I'm not that mobile, I tend not to get around too much. So, right, one last question off anyone? No more? No more?
There's a gentleman up there.
When you were aware of these lights in the sky, have you ever photoed or filmed any of the orbs that entered into your house?
No. The orb that I saw in the house, it scared me, and it had a negative impact on the dogs. I've got 2 dogs, Bedlington Terriers, and they just totally went haywire. One of the dogs lay down in the corner and wouldn't move. Another one started barking and snarling, and I got a very uneasy feeling. I watched this come through the kitchen and straight into the front room. It scared me. I sat outside till about 2 in the morning till my sister came back. I was too scared to get back in the house. Well, no, I'm serious, man, serious.
Well, what I'm going to say, Nick, is that there is a film or DVD capturing the lights, which is on display or wherever it is. This lady who captures these is an 80-year-old lady.
Right.
And she reckons the message that she gets from them is that these are light beings who will come here for the purpose of mankind because we're making such a mess of our environment. I don't know if you had any of that.
Yeah, no, I've heard the same thing. I think these things are around anyway. I think they've always been around. I think a lot of the things in the sky, like plasmatic fauna and these beings, they're sky beings, I'm convinced. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening intently.